Well, hello and welcome to a new episode of Turning the Page. My name is Siddhartha Talya, and I'm joined today by Mr. Adhirath Sethi, the author of this book, "The Moving of Mountains: The Remarkable Story of the Agastya International Foundation." Let me begin by something that you write in your book. Let me quote it to you. You say, and I quote: "The Indian system of teaching had been put in place during the British rule to churn out an army of clerks and yes men to support their colonial overlords. The Lancastrian system of education, also called the monitorial system or the Madras system, was developed to mass educate students in a factory style environment. Interestingly, the motto of its innovator, Joseph Lancaster, was Qui docet decit, he who teaches learns. And this was a precursor of peer to peer learning, which somehow got lost in the Indian education space, leaving behind only the rote learning system that most institutions seemed content with. This is, of course, a critique of our education system. Do you think it's prevailed even to this day?
So, yes, I suppose in many pockets, just the sheer volume of students I think that India has to deal with makes it very difficult to break away from the rote learning system. And many folks who I've met have asked, do you think it's possible to go back to a Gurukul system, for example? To which I say, well, you cannot possibly think of a student-teacher ratio of 1:5, or the other way around, rather. There is a lot of volume here for a teacher to actually manage. And so what Agastya is doing is alleviating that to some extent. And we're trying to show not so much that marks aren't important, although you might be saying that they're not the end of the world, but that there's other ways or other models of thinking that children can potentially look at. So when you look at a child, for example, now in a school, and even when we were growing up, it was usually linguistics and logic are the only two things that are really prided as quote unquote intelligence. A child was never really evaluated on kinesthetics, for example, or spatial intelligence or musical intelligence. And so what Agastya is doing is not so much trying to break the mold of saying exams aren't important per se, because we do work with kids from, say, the fifth to the ninth, and we understand that at the 10th standard level, boards do become a priority, and that's not something you can just say that, stop caring about it, but rather to help children find an identity for themselves through the education journey that they take with Agastya. So when you're exposed to science in a very hands-on way, when you're allowed to interact with the teacher, when you're allowed to disagree or debate or voice your opinion in terms of how a class should be, I think it draws on a kind of confidence that many children otherwise forget, because we have a system wherein you are taught and you're told what to do, and then you go and write a paper. Whereas here it's more interactive, it's more a journey of discovery for the child. And which is why we started with the motto of curiosity, creativity, and innovation as being the pillars that we want to reinfuse back into Indian education. But caring and confidence became the next two pillars that we added in much later, when we realized that the interventions Agastya was doing was not only helping these kids learn science in a more meaningful way, wherein they were practically understanding how science works, but was giving them voice to understand what it means to debate, to have a discussion, and to take that journey of discovery with a teacher or even with their peers, and what that teaches them about themselves.
There'll, of course, be interactions with the government as well, be it the central government or the state government. Now, when one speaks of education in India, one of the criticisms is that it's always been a case of misplaced priorities, that a very small percentage of the GDP is actually allocated towards education. In Agastya's dealing with the government, did this actually come across? What were some of the challenges that you had to deal with as an NGO? Because when you're talking about growth in terms of scale, there is a significant amount of reliance that's also placed upon the government of the day, be it at the center or the respective state in which you're operating in, to achieve that growth. What were the challenges and what were some of the surprises that the entire process threw up?
So I guess at one end, you can say culture in India is geared towards education. People who can afford it, and parents typically don't tell their kids, don't bother going to college, which does actually happen in some other countries. So we're lucky that we've always prided education as something that is valuable and that is important. And yes, circumstances prevented a lot of people from accessing it all the time, but it's never been something that we don't want. Coming to the government, we have a lot of here and now problems, I think, in India. And I think it's fair to say that If a child, for example, does not eat, there's no point trying to teach them science. They're not really going to absorb anything. Or if nutrition or if healthcare is an issue, then those are problems that are understandably a lot more urgent. And this is something that Agastya came upon in its early dealings, not so much with governments, but with donors who were quite keen that India should first alleviate these problems before they start looking at education. And many people at that time felt we're doing a good enough job. At least we're churning out graduates. It may not be creative learning, it may not be inquiry-based thinking, but kids are graduating and we are managing to educate them to the best we can. Once Agastya started doing its work, especially in the surrounding areas around the campus in Gurupalli, near Kuppam, the government was extremely excited because they said, okay, we're getting this wonderful add-on to the day of a child, wherein Agastya vans would come in, spend about 2 hours, teachers would get a bit of a break, teachers themselves would benefit from watching the instructors. And so the Karnataka government was almost immediately supportive, I think, of what Agastya was doing, which was why we were able to expand in North Karnataka so effectively. Consequently, as we spread across the country, we generally found that there was a very welcoming attitude in the way the government saw what Agastya was doing. I think we've been extremely fortunate that they see us as an ally rather than someone that's trying to come and poke holes and say you guys aren't doing a good job. And I think we've stayed with that course because we, as I said, we do understand that teaching a few 100 million kids a year is never going to be an easy task. So if we can make that task a little bit easier by our interventions, that's what we're trying to do. So in every state, I think there's been a different story. There's been a different way in which the government has stepped forth and said, yes, we'd like to give you permission to operate in this area. Let's see how you do. And then come back saying, yes, the feedback has been great. The response has been amazing from principals, from teachers. We'd like you to continue and we'd like you to keep doing what you're doing. So more recently, we've expanded into Assam, to the borderlands area.
Let me ask you a question about the NEP. Now, it on paper is meant to encourage both experiential learning as well as curiosity-driven education. That's how it defines it. Purely in terms of implementation and a broader national vision that the NEP has, uh, do you believe that it's a realistic aspiration on the part of the Ministry of HRD to be implementing it on scale nationally? Do you think we have the infrastructure and the resources to be doing it? Because sometimes when these words are thrown about, they do draw an element of suspicion as well, because it's not the first time that something like this has been incorporated as part of one's national policy. How do you see this taking off on the ground?
See, we had, I think, in the past, the planning commission, and we had Ramji was on the, at the center. He was asked to, Sam Pitroda had asked him to, even contribute. And some of these things took off, some of them didn't. What ends up happening is you have to kind of find your way through the whole thing. I think the NEP has, as you said, recommended a lot of stuff that Agastya is, in fact, or has been doing. Now, is it possible to do? No, but it's a question of if you can't solve some of the problem, do you not solve any of the problem, right? So it may not be that it goes across the country and it's easily implementable, but in the pockets where it can be implemented, I think that would be great. And what Agastya has shown is that kind of learning and that kind of education does help create a meaningful intervention in a child's life. And it may be too ambitious, or you might say it's a little bit overreaching, but I think it's important to have the blueprint in place and then try and hit the bar rather than to say let's continue. So we were using the NCERT as a framework before, and that also worked well for us. It's not as if, because at least gave us a structure around which to base our models and base our interventions. And we'll work with the NEP as it requires, and I hope it will be as meaningful a collaboration.
Mr. Sethi, do you agree with the criticism of the private educational system in India that it's become a system of money making, very much at the expense of student welfare, because of the manner in which certain subjects are taught, not the facilities that are available for students to access necessarily, but they're paying hefty fees for a quality of education that is not commensurate with what they're actually paying. Do you believe that criticism is valid?
Obviously, there's going to be a mix, I suppose. There are schools that are paying or charging, but doing a phenomenal job and giving the kind of facilities that you won't get elsewhere. And there's going to be schools that you may look at it and subjectively decide that I don't think I'm getting my money's worth there. I think the bigger issue is what kind of journey are they taking the kids on? And is it one that is actually conducive to them coming out as better versions of themselves at the other end? Or are they just doing the same of the old thing, which is to say, okay, even very good international private schools, you could say, still put a lot of emphasis purely on the exams and probably don't give enough emphasis to the child in terms of, okay, what are your strengths? I may not even have a subject to test you on those strengths, but can I, as a teacher, at least give you the confidence that this is something that you should hone either in private, on your own, or that you should definitely explore once the whole education journey that you are on this particular school comes to an end. And it is a commercial venture now. I think a lot of us grew up in schools not really thinking of them as commercial ventures, right? I went to Rishi Valley, which is a non-profit, and you just assume the teachers were always going to be there. You never realized that there was someone hiring these people and that it was their lives and it was a job at the end of the day that maybe they were very committed to, but at the end of the day, they're trying to do right by their own families. And I was just saying the other day, I don't envy a school nowadays because it is tough to get good teachers and good teaching staff, and it is not easy to retain those staff because again, you're competing with the moment you start that level of competition, you're always going to find that someone might is not just doing the teaching because they love teaching or they love the students, but that they may need to look out for their own careers and move on. So it is a tough game. I think I don't envy them their position right now, but I think the one thing Agastya has done in this respect is to put teacher training at the center of its activities as well, because it did believe that there's no way it's a chicken and egg situation. You can't expect a student and inspire them on campus or inspire them with the use of a mobile van. And then they go back to this classroom and then they're demotivated again because the teacher themselves uh, don't really see it as something that they want to be a part of. So bringing the teacher out of the classroom, interacting with them, trying to infuse in them a sense of purpose in terms of this is how your own teaching methods can be improved and can be made more approachable is something that we've done with a lot of the government school teachers. And I think through Navam, we're trying to encourage private schools to uh, adopt these models as well and trying to create a system whereby we say, okay, why don't you send your teachers to Agastya's campus for a week and let's see what I'm sure they're very capable. I'm sure they know stuff, but it might be a great experience for them to see how this hands-on, low-cost, interactive learning methods work. And it may add an element to their own teaching journey that might be useful to them.
Well, all the very best. As of now, it's 200,000 government teachers that you've trained and almost 25 million children that
Yeah,
you've reached
that's right.
across different parts of India. And your vision is, of course, to reach 100 million. Well, all the very best, Mr. Sethi, and to Agastya. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the book, The Moving of Mountains, the remarkable story of the Agastya International Foundation. Many thanks, Mr. Sethi, for sparing time and speaking
Thanks
to
for
us.
that. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.